Welcome into the final regular season edition of the FCS Football Show. I am your host, Mid-Major Matt of SportsMemo.com. Let's bring in Rob Veno, WagerTalk.com. Rob, how you doing?
I am good this morning, Matt. How about yourself?
Doing well, and as always with the show, we'll do a little bit of a recap of whatsoever and get into three big games. And of course, these are going to be really big games for the FCS, and then we'll do our last looks as well. Don't forget to check us out, sportsmemo.com for me, wagertalk.com for Rob Veno, and of course, there's a ton of sports going on, NBA, NHL, Major League Baseball, racing, golf, whatever you need. These two sites are the places you want to go, Sports Talk and Sports Memo, and wagertalk.com. All right, Rob. As part of our recap here, 6 teams are into the playoffs. Weber State, Monmouth, Sacred Heart, Jacksonville State, Davidson, and Sam Houston State. They've got their automatic bids as champions of those conferences. What do you think, Rob? So far, we've got a nice little field building here for the playoffs.
Yeah, it really is, Matt. There's a fight for these at-large bids. FCS Selection Show, Sunday morning, 11:30. ESPNU for those who want to tune in. The field obviously narrowed down to 16 this year, 4 number 1 seeds, and then the rest of the field. But there's a couple of bids at stake here this week, a lot of meaningful games. The teams that are in, Matt, I think all deserve to be there. The Sacred Heart game, the NEC so-called championship game, was quite the overtime thriller for sure. Sacred Heart blows a 14-point fourth quarter lead and then comes back in overtime to win. So we're getting some dramatic stuff here out of these FCS teams. And I think the playoffs are going to be really, really good. Like you said, it's shaping up to be a really nice field.
Yeah, and certainly the Davidson situation is an interesting one as well, but they make the playoffs out of the Pioneer League. All right, let's get into this. 3 big games today, on Saturday, and we'll start out in the CAA. Delaware is on the road against Villanova. It is a 1 o'clock kickoff. You can see the game on Flow Sports. The game opened up at 7.5 for Delaware. It has come down a little bit. Delaware minus 6.5. The total is 56. Nova won this game 55-33 last year. And listening to a lot of the Delaware players, especially on the defensive side of the ball, they want to rectify what happened in that game. Some quick notes here. Villanova has committed just 1 turnover all season and has gone 4 straight games against the Blue Hens in this series without committing one. Daniel Smith had a little bit of a down season so far. Had 48 touchdowns last year, but just 3 so far this spring. Justin Covington, though, has been really good the last couple games with 6 touchdowns. And then on the Delaware side, we know it's their defense. Second in points allowed per game at 9.5. They're allowing below 200 yards per game, and Dejar Lee is one of their guys with 2 touchdowns in 3 of their 4 games. So, Rob, a road favorite here for Delaware against Villanova. Big-time stakes for this one.
Yeah, there really are, Matt. And like you say, that dominance that Villanova has over Delaware, I think, is at the forefront of all the Delaware player minds heading into this one. They want to kind of turn that around. It's either 11 out of 12 or 12 out of 13 that Villanova's won in this particular series. But if you examine what's going on here this year between these two, they've both played the same 3 CAA teams. They both played Maine. They both played Stony Brook. They both played Rhode Island. So when you go to statistical stuff, you can probably find meaningful numbers. And while Villanova's been great offensively, Delaware has been great offensively as well. It's the top 2 scoring offenses inside this conference. It's the number 2 and the number 3 rush offense. It's the number 2 and the number 3 pass offense. So Delaware not lagging behind Villanova against the same 3 opponents as far as offensive numbers are concerned. Nolan Henderson's been really good at quarterback this year for them. The gap comes on the defensive side of the football where Villanova's been pretty poor. Their last game a couple weeks ago against Maine, they did straighten some things out, only allowing 17 points. But defensively against the run, Villanova giving up almost twice as much yardage per game as Delaware, 165-86. And pass defense-wise, Villanova's been the second worst pass defense in the Colonial, 220 pass yards per game allowed. Delaware only 115. The Nova offense, Matt, when I broke it down, they're so diverse. They'll find where your weakness is, and they'll beat you that way. Against Stony Brook, 305 passing yards, very little on the ground. Against Rhode Island, 321 rushing yards, very little through the air. And then last week, as you mentioned, against Maine, big day, 252 rushing yards. to 196 passing, but I don't know that they're going to find any cracks in the Delaware defense here to that extent. I think that's why Delaware's favored, obviously, because of this significant gap in the defensive side, on the defensive side of the football. At first, I thought the total was too high at 56.5, but I'm second guessing that now. I'm not sure that it is. But I wonder if Villanova defensively can stop Delaware. Last week, real quick, just an exterior point here against Delaware State. Delaware gave up 2 touchdowns due to pump blocks. And I'm sure Villanova's special teams coach has them going through film here. One of the pump blocks went for a touchdown. The other one set Delaware State up inside the 10-yard line. So 14 points off a block punch. You can't have those type of mistakes in a game like this. It should be a great game, Matt. I don't know that I could lay 6.5, but I could see where the difference is between these two. And as you mentioned, it's certainly on the defensive side. Villanova has not been there this year.
Yeah, there's a nice pedigree, and of course, when you win and you dominate a series like that, there's sometimes you want to lean to that team. Speaking of domination, has ended our next game, the Military Classic of the South. It is the Citadel taking on VMI. The Citadel had won 12 straight in this series, and then last year, VMI knocked them off. Keydet's open about a 4.5-point favorite. It's up to 5.5 now. 5.5 was the open. The total opened around 49.5. It's up to 51 now. And a couple of notes here. VMI just has to win and they're in. They represent the SoCon. Or if Mercer loses to Stanford, and Mercer is an underdog to Stanford. VMI, when you talk Keydet's football, of course, the unfortunate injury to Reese Udinsky means Seth Morgan comes in. He's completed over 76% of his passes. He's got 808 total yards of offense. And he's got Jacob Harris, the 6'4" wide receiver, who is the FCS leader in reception. So VMI playing well, although they've cooled off a little bit as of late. How will they handle being this team that is in a situation they haven't been in quite a while in terms of being a favorite and making the playoffs? And then you look at the Citadel. They were 0-8, and then they knocked off Wofford and Furman. They ran the ball 118 in 126 plays those 2 games. Last week was the first time since 2018 they won a game without completing a pass. So we know what we're coming from the Citadel here. They certainly want to play the spoiler here, Rob, but VMI has looked really good this season. Can the Citadel knock them off in this one?
Yeah, and that just really is determined by whether or not VMI's run defense can handle the Citadel rush attack, right? VMI started the year, I think the last time we were on, Matt, we sort of talked about them on the defensive side where they started out the season so well and then kind of fell off a little bit. But the other side of that coin is the offense didn't start the year great, and it's really turned it up. The game against East Tennessee State, they ran into a team that could play some defense. And, boy, the last couple drives of that game for VMI when they were on the move and just wound up making mistakes. They had multiple opportunities to win that game, and in the fourth quarter kind of failed offensively. So we'll see if their pass offense can light up the Citadel secondary. I really like over in this game. I think that both offensive strengths match up pretty well against the opposing defenses here. I think VMI is going to be able to throw the football. They're going to be able to score some points. That East Tennessee State defense is a pretty good one. And as I mentioned, if it weren't for a couple of mistakes, VMI would have had 30-plus points in that game. And I also think that Citadel on the ground will be able to move it. So for me, I think it's going to be a total play. It'll probably end up on my client list here. I think these two are going to get over. Trying to, pick the winner here is a little bit tough because I respect what Citadel's done the last couple of weeks. And I think you made a great point. VMI just never been here before. And last week may be an indication of them not being here before because they could have clinched last week. And instead, as I mentioned, fourth quarter failures led to a loss. They'll try again here. We'll see if they can get it done.
And, of course, the other thing to consider here, now this is college, and it's a little bit different. Who knows how VMI is going to handle this, but the Mercer-Stanford game is kicking off at 1. This is a 1:30 kickoff. Stanford a 5.5-point favorite in that one. So maybe a little bit of scoreboard watching if Mercer's starting to lose. Now, I'm sure that the school's going to do their best here. But, Rob, how do you factor that in, that we're going to have a half hour of Mercer-Stanford before this game even starts?
Yeah, if you're the coach, you make sure your team's not paying any attention whatsoever. But that is kind of hard to do. You just have to have them focused here and not worry about that other result. VMI, handle your own business. Now, if the game result comes which it will, before the conclusion of VMI, and VMI is in good shape at that time, then you might see a little bit of celebration out of them. Hopefully they don't blow things in the fourth quarter. But it's a good point, Matt. At least it's not a situation where the other game, the Mercer game, will be over before VMI Citadel take the field. It still forces VMI to have full focus and go out there and take care of business.
Yeah, and certainly if your book offers some sort of live situation and we see a result happens that may change what goes on in the VMI game. If Mercer loses and then VMI starts sitting guys, you want to get in live. It depends. I don't know how many books are doing live FCS football. All right, final game. Of course, we have to do North Dakota State. It is a 3:30 kickoff. North Dakota State is hosting South Dakota State. Line open up at North Dakota State -1.5, a total of 44. It's ticked up a little bit to 2 and ticked up a little in the total at 44.5. The Dakota Marker Trophy, a share of the Missouri Valley Football Conference title, and the auto bid is at stake. Something to note here, the winning team has had a higher time of possession in the last 16 meetings in this series since 2008. 12 North Dakota State wins, 4 South Dakota State wins, and we know what these two teams want to do. They want to run the ball. They both want to run the ball. The one thing here is South Dakota State has not played since March 20th. A weird statistic here, South Dakota State has outscored their opponents 59-7 in the second quarter. So that's something to watch out for here. But then you've got North Dakota State. They're third in the nation in rushing yards allowed. South Dakota State's fourth in the nation in rushing yards allowed. We could see a ton of runs. But once again, the rust factor for South Dakota State versus North Dakota State playing at Northern Iowa and winning last week, Rob. How do you handicap that?
Yeah, I mean, it's an advantage, Matt. In my mind, it's an advantage. The fact that North Dakota State was able to get back to the field after having some time off themselves due to COVID issues. But boy, having that game against a rugged defense like Northern Iowa, it puts you back into the physical aspect of the game here, which with these two defenses and, of course, offenses as well, this is going to be physical. It's done a couple of things to South Dakota State here. Their head coach says that they call every week an improvement week, and they've now had 3 weeks to improve. But he also kind of hinted toward the fact that it can be somewhat of a negative, so they don't go every single day, or they haven't gone every single day in practice because it gets to be too much for the players. One good thing to note here for South Dakota State, Matt, is the last time we saw them, their top running back, Pierre Strong, was unavailable. And the 3 weeks off have given him time to heal. So he'll be present for this game starting at running back. That's huge. He's widely considered the best running back in the Missouri Valley Football Conference. So that's a boost for South Dakota State. But, usually you can handicap these things, at least myself, from the fundamental aspect, but not knowing where South Dakota State's going to be at, not knowing where they're going to be with, let's remember, it's a freshman quarterback in the biggest game of his career right here. These two teams have met the last couple of years with everything on the line. They're usually close ball games. I don't know how the freshman will handle it here. North Dakota State has not been the North Dakota State of old, but I think last week having that game is just a monster advantage here. The total, when I looked this morning, was 44.5, and 24-20 seems very, very realistic here, or less than 24-20. On a normal, in a normal setting, this obviously is not a normal setting. I think North Dakota State at less than a field goal probably has to be the way to go, Matt, simply because we haven't seen SDSU for so long. They could surprise us, and it's probably why I won't get to the window with this, because I think overall they're the better team this season. But too many circumstances that I just can't get a good gauge on here with them. A game, and you mentioned it before, we don't know how many books. In fact, I don't know that I've seen any doing in-game FCS betting, but this would be ideal for it, because if you saw South Dakota State without shaky legs and they hit the ground running at the start of the first quarter, then you could get involved. I would get involved with South Dakota State if I saw that, but without knowing, it's tough to bet this game.
Yeah, and certainly it feels like the same conversation we had with the JMU William Mary game a couple of weeks ago. We are like, oh, William and Mary, JMU hasn't played in a bunch of weeks. William Mary's home. And then all of a sudden, because, in college basketball, as we've talked about before, you fade the team coming off a COVID pause in the first half as they get their legs under them. Well, I mean, this season so far, Rob, we've seen some weird things where the teams coming off COVID pauses have been really good. So, I mean, I would say North Dakota State first half, but it doesn't seem like a guarantee here.
No, it really doesn't, because we don't know, man. And you never know how to grade the 3 weeks here in football off of what we saw. In football being the much more physical sport than basketball, sometimes the layoff is good for the body, and maybe, it'll all be 2020 hindsight, right? Oh, South Dakota State was so fresh. That's why they came out and won that game. But it's for all the marbles here. I mean, they're playing for one of the 4 number 1 seeds. If South Dakota State wins, they'll get one. If North Dakota State wins, they'll get one. So very important game. Just trying to gauge what that layoff is going to do to South Dakota State is just too tough for me at this point.
All right, so that's our 3 big games here. Before we go, as we like to do now, look, most shows do best bets, and of course, if either one of us have one, we will give it out. But with so much uncertainty with regards to lines and kickoff on game day, who's going to be in, who's going to be out, will the game even be played? We're going to kind of do a last looks kind of thing here. So, Rob, what are you looking at as we get set for this card on Saturday?
Well, in preparation for it, Matt, and I'm going to kind of hit your home territory here, but I did some work on the Richmond JMU game, which point spread wise, 12.5, 50.5. Both of these teams certainly, from Richmond's standpoint, they want to try and knock that little brother status off. From JMU's standpoint, their last game looked really, really good the last time we saw them. But I tell you, I lean under in this game for a couple of reasons. I thought that Elon's head coach made a really good point. One of his quotes was, people don't realize how good Richmond is defensively. They're extremely physical and tough up front. And with that knowledge, knowing that JMU has leaned on the run game for the most part this season, right? Their play calling percentage is 56% toward the run, 44% toward the pass, and they've been a better run team. They'd like to be able to grind you down. But with the Richmond run defense being as good as it's been this season, and then to have that endorsement from an opposing head coach, I think that Richmond might be able to keep JMU, to 28 or less on the scoreboard. All that being said, this is a huge step up in class for Richmond to be playing this JMU defense, and we just don't know, the dual threat ability of their quarterback, Mancuso. JMU is very capable of stopping him in both aspects, and you could see a game in the 28-10 vicinity. To me, 50.5 looked way too high. I think Richmond's defense brings more to the table than maybe some think, especially where that run defense is concerned. So to me, I think that might be worth a pretty good look here. Matt, and you can obviously add to that, a little bit more about those two squads internally than I do. But I think under 50.5 is a pretty good way to look in that game.
Yeah, and of course, I was going to also go with this game, and I think Richmond's a live dog here. And as we talk, a couple of places have actually ticked up to 13. There's some 12.5s minus 120s, but there are some minus 13s out there. I think if you want to potentially wait, see if there's more JMU money, and maybe you get a 14 here. I don't know. The FCS markets are very unpredictable, but as you talked about, Richmond's defense, I talked to Kobe Turner on my radio show this week, and they talked about getting ready for JMU's defense. And remember, this is the third time that they've had a prep week. Now, one of the weeks it was a little bit cut off because they had the announcement a little bit early that there wasn't going to be a game, but this is the third time these two teams have prepared for each other. Both teams coming off of a decent little pause here, whether it was because of their own or because of their opponents here. JMU had a little bit of both with their opponent last week bowing out for the rest of the season here. But I just think Richmond is kind of tired of being, as you mentioned, the little brother here. And I think certainly, home field advantage is not going to be very much. There will be some fans there, a little bit of fans, but I don't think it's going to be enough. And I think Richmond has the defense, as you said, to keep them in it. Remember, this is a Richmond team now that's huddling up a lot more. They're grinding out drives. They're going through some 7-8 minute drives here. And if they try and shorten things up, and they're going to want to against the JMU team that wants to go, I think that Richmond has the pieces here. So what I might be looking for is it's 13 now. I would wait. If it gets to 14, I would definitely make it a play on Richmond plus 14. as usual, I don't know how the markets go in this sort of thing. If there are people who are betting on the FCS, usually they know what they're doing. But there might be some who see JMU and be like, hey, I got to bet on this team. They're number one in the land. They're one of the best teams, and they're at home. So, Rob, I think Richmond's a live dog in this one.
Yeah, and I think that last point you made, Matt, is legit here, because we've seen in a couple of their games, and I'm trying, as you're talking, the wheels are spinning. I'm trying to think of the games, but where JMU Friday night, Saturday morning really rose in point spread. Now, we know it doesn't take a lot of money to move these lines, but JMU has been bet up in a couple of situations and then failed to cover. The one really close game, maybe it was Elon, I'm not sure, but I think they were bet up really big in that game. So JMU, to your point, has attracted money closer to kickoff, and perhaps they do again here. Like I say, it doesn't take much to move it. A half point, a point, you could be looking at 14 pretty soon. But there does, throughout the season, the few games that they've played, there seems to have been JMU money come, like I say, in that area of Friday night, Saturday morning.
Yeah, they beat Elon 20-17 on the road March 6th, so that's the game that you were talking about. So certainly just something to watch as we get closer to kickoff. These lines are a bit volatile, as you know. Make sure to check out our web pages. WagerTalk.com is where you can find Rob Veno, NBA basketball, Major League Baseball, all the good stuff there. Certainly the FCS card as well. And you can find me at sportsmemo.com, FCS stuff, Major League Baseball stuff, the occasional NBA props. You'll want to go to those pages and check us both out. And Rob, really excited. Next week, as we continue this show on, we'll be talking playoffs, 16 teams. And as you said, the selection show is on Sunday, and we'll break it all down next week. So for Rob Veno of WagerTalk.com, I'm Matt Josephs, SportsMemo.com. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you again next week.